They pay you to go crazy in Antarctica. Not officially, of course. The contract Meridian Group makes you sign is full of clauses about psychological stability and mandatory wellness checks. But the real currency down here isn't the six-figure salary. It's the isolation. It's the bottom of the world, a place so fundamentally empty it can scour a man's thoughts clean. That was the sales pitch I gave myself anyway. I needed a place where the ghosts couldn't get a signal. My brother Leo was a ghost long before he died chasing one. He spent his life hunting for patterns in the static, for voices in the white noise. Phantom military bases, cryptic number stations, alien messages hidden in the cosmic background radiation. To him, every mystery was a thread, and if he just pulled it hard enough, the real world would unravel and show its secrets. He died of dehydration in the Nevada desert, chasing a secret he was sure was just over the next dune. The official report was mundane. A man with a history of delusion got lost. I knew better. He was killed by his own faith. I chose the opposite faith. In verifiable data, in the clean binary of code, in the elegant certainty of a well-grounded electrical system. As the senior communications technician at Meridian Station Hyperion, my job was to ensure the signal was always clear. My world was one of signal-to-noise ratios, of latency and bandwidth. If a problem existed, I could find it, diagnose it, and fix it. There were no ghosts in my machine. The anomaly started on a Tuesday. I was running a routine diagnostic on the primary deep space array, a series of dishes that siphoned data from Meridian's orbital satellites. My screen was a cascade of familiar numbers, a river of information I could read like a book. Then it appeared. A single thin line of aberrant data in sub-band channel 7. It wasn't noise. Noise is messy, chaotic, like a child scribbling with a crayon. This was a razor line, a repeating signal, mathematically perfect. It had a structure, a symmetry that felt less like a natural phenomenon and more like a piece of architecture. My first thought was equipment failure. A feedback loop maybe, or a resonance in one of the new cryo coolers. I ran a full spectrum analysis, a process that basically takes a high-resolution photograph of every frequency the station is receiving. The signal was still there, a perfect spike in a forest of normal background chatter. I didn't report it. Not yet. A report goes to Alastair Kane, our station commander, and a man who believes paperwork can hold back a blizzard. An unexplained signal would become incident report, followed by a cross-departmental memo and a series of very serious meetings about protocols I wrote myself. It was easier to just solve the problem. For 3 days, I chased it. I recalibrated the entire array, checked every inch of coaxial cable for faults, and even swapped out the primary server blade. The signal remained. It didn't fluctuate. It didn't decay. It was a single, unwavering note played on an instrument the size of a solar system. My frustration mounted. It was a knot I couldn't untie, a bug I couldn't patch. The skin around my eyes felt tight. My own system, my sanctuary of logic, had a flaw, and I couldn't find the source. On the 4th day, it changed. The mathematical precision vanished. The signal broadened, its wavelength shifting into the audio spectrum. A low hiss came through my monitor speakers. It was just static, the sound of nothing. I leaned back in my chair, the tension in my shoulders easing for the first time in days. A solar flare, maybe. Some exotic atmospheric interference finally burning itself out. The universe was chaotic, but it was a chaos I understood. Then a voice came through the static. "Owen, is that you?" My hand froze on its way to the console. The air in the comms hub, always moving, seemed to fall completely still. The voice was thin, distorted by static, but I knew it. Every inflection, every slight, reedy tremble. It was the voice of my brother Leo, the one I hadn't heard in 5 years, the one that belonged to a dead man. My fingers retracted from the console as if it were a hot stove. A sound tried to form in my throat, a dry click of denial. I didn't breathe. I just listened to the hiss surrounding my brother's voice, the voice of a ghost caught in a snowstorm of static. "Owen, I know you're there. I found it. The signal, it's not what we thought." My training took over, a reflex overriding the paralysis. This wasn't real. It was an injection, a malicious broadcast piggybacking on our satellite link. I slammed my hand down on the key to isolate the channel. The speaker cut to silence. The red light above the Channel 7 monitor glowed, confirming the quarantine. It was a trick, a sophisticated, cruel trick. Who had access? Who had the motive? My mind raced through the crew roster. Alistair, too much of a Boy Scout. Casper Borg, the ice driller. The man barely spoke, let alone programmed deepfake audio. It had to be external. A rival corporation, maybe. A hacker group showing off. I leaned in and started hammering commands into the keyboard, each keystroke sharp and fast, like I was trying to beat the truth out of the machine. I needed a source, an origin point. The machine whirred, analyzing packets, searching for the intrusion. The terminal screen blinked back its result a moment later. A single clean line of text. Source internal. The signal wasn't coming from outside. The system insisted it was being generated from within the station's own network. I ran the diagnostic again. Same result. My own equipment was lying to me, telling me the ghost was already inside the house. The internal comms light flashed. Alistair. I let it blink 3 times before jabbing the button. His face appeared on my secondary monitor, pale and drawn. He looked like a man who had seen something he couldn't file a report on. "Beck, what in God's name is happening to our comms?" "I'm working on it. I've got a signal intrusion on a secure band." "It's not just one band," Alistair said. "It's all over the shortwave. Helena is in the med bay. She says she heard her daughter." His voice cracked on the last word. Helena's daughter had died in a car crash 2 years ago. "And Borg, someone saw him just standing in the atrium, the common area, staring at the window. Said he was listening to his grandmother." I swiped a hand across my screen, pulling up the camera feed for the atrium. It was a wide, hexagonal room, all white surfaces and a single massive window looking out into the permanent twilight of the Antarctic night. The space was empty except for one figure. Casper Borg stood motionless, his back to the camera, facing the void. He was a thick, solid man, built for the hard work of drilling ice cores, but now he looked like a statue. "It's a psychoacoustic broadcast, Alistair," I said, forcing the words out. The explanation tasted flimsy and thin. "Someone is weaponizing grief. They're using our personnel files, mining personal data to create echoes." "Who? How?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." I leaned closer to my monitor, watching Casper's unmoving form. "Tell everyone to stay off the comms. Treat it as a hostile signal. No one listens, no one responds. I'll find the source and cut it." Alistair just stared at me, his expression twisted with something between panic and disbelief, as if the rules of the world had just rewritten themselves in front of him. He was a man adrift, his procedural life raft sinking beneath him. "Just fix it, Owen," he finally said, and cut the feed. A logical problem required a logical solution. The ghost of Leo was a piece of code, nothing more. My brother was a memory, and memory couldn't broadcast on a secure channel. I spent the next several hours in a state of controlled fury, attacking my own systems. I built firewalls, ran packet-sniffing protocols, and initiated root-level integrity checks. It was like wrestling with smoke. Every test came back clean. The system insisted it was healthy, that the voice was coming from inside, from a user with valid credentials that didn't exist. My comms panel became a map of the station's unraveling. A call from Alistair reporting that 2 of the geology team were refusing to leave their quarters. They'd barricaded the door, claiming they were in communication. An alert from the medbay. Helena had to be sedated after trying to smash a comms panel, screaming for her daughter to answer her. The signal wasn't just on the main array anymore. It was bleeding into everything, a poison seeping through the station's digital veins. Through it all, I kept one camera feed pinned to a corner of my main screen, the view of the atrium. Casper Borg had eventually turned from the window. He hadn't rushed or panicked. He just walked slowly out of the frame. I checked the logs. He'd walked straight to his quarters. He hadn't been seen since. I noted it, but filed it away. He was a symptom of the larger problem. I was focused on the disease. It was almost 24 hours later when Alistair appeared at the door to the comms hub, the first person to come up here in person. "He's still in there," Alistair said. There was no need to ask who. "Casper, he's not answering his comm. He missed his shift. I've had people knocking on his door for the last hour. Nothing. He's probably catatonic, Alistair. He's listening to the signal." "We can't just leave him in there," he insisted, a desperate edge to his voice. He was a manager looking for a procedure that didn't exist. "It's a wellness issue, a protocol violation." I finally pushed back from my console. The digital ghost hunt was a failure. The problem was now physical. It was down the hall behind a locked door. "So what's your plan? Ask the ghost to open up?" The sarcasm hit him like a slap. "My plan is to follow procedure for an unresponsive crew member. I'm opening his door. I want you there." "Why? In case he tries to hack you with his brain." "Because," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone, "you're the only one who still sounds like you believe this is a problem that can be fixed. And right now, I need that." The honesty of that statement cut through my frustration. He was terrified, and he was admitting it. I gave a slow nod. The corridor outside Casper's quarters was silent. It was just me, Alistair, and a heavy-set maintenance tech named Garrus, who held a pneumatic prying tool. Garrus placed the tool's jaws against the door seam. Alistair looked at me, a final questioning glance. I just nodded. With a sharp hiss of compressed air, the tool bit into the metal. The lock mechanism gave way with a loud crack that cut through the silence like a gunshot in a church. Garrus pulled the door open. The room was unnervingly neat, the bed made, the personal items on the desk arranged in perfect lines. In the far corner, his back to us, stood Casper Borg. He was perfectly still. "Casper!" Alistair called out. There was no answer. He didn't move. He just stood there facing the blank wall as if it were a cinema screen. "I think he's in shock," Alistair whispered. "Casper, it's Alistair. We're here to help." Slowly, he began to turn. His movement was a smooth rotation, as if his neck were a perfectly oiled bearing. The overhead light of the corridor spilled into the room, catching the side of his head. My brain, conditioned by a lifetime of data, anticipated the familiar curve of a cheekbone, the shadow of an eye socket, the light illuminated skin. Just skin. As his head completed its turn to face us fully, the anticipation in my mind collapsed into a screaming void. There was no face. It wasn't wounded or burned. It was gone. Erased. Where his eyes, nose and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, seamless ovoid of flesh, pale and placid. The skin was stretched taut over the underlying bone without a single pore or wrinkle. It was like a sculptor had taken a finished bust and, with one sweep of a thumb, wiped away all of its features, leaving only the fundamental shape. The pneumatic tool clattered from Garrus's hand, hitting the floor grate with a loud metallic clang. He took a stumbling step backward, one hand flying up to cover his own mouth. Beside me, Alistair made a choked, gagging sound, a noise of pure animal negation. My own body seemed to turn to stone. I was looking at a violation, not of a person, but of reality itself. My thoughts, usually a clean cascade of logic, became a logjam of broken data. Anaphylaxis, toxin. No. Hallucination. No, they see it too. A mask. The skin is seamless. It's his skin. Every rational explanation I tried to grab dissolved into dust before I could fully form it. This was not a medical condition. This was a biological impossibility standing 3 meters away from me. The featureless head tilted, a slight inquisitive motion. It was looking at us. Not with eyes, but with the entirety of its blank surface. There was an intelligence there, a focus that was terrifying in its alien simplicity. Then it took a step forward. His socked feet made no sound on the floor. It was not a monster. It was not a victim. It was something new. My mind finally produced a single clear thought, a line of code that ran through the wreckage of my worldview and defined the start of my new life. Every mystery is a fraud, a glitch, or a delusion. And I had been wrong. My brother was a fool who died chasing shadows. I was the pragmatist who had just found one standing in his socks and issued grey shirt, staring at me with a face made of nothing. Casper took another step. The movement was economical, graceful in a way the clumsy, quiet ice driller had never been. "Stop!" Alistair's voice ripped through the silence like a cracked speaker at full volume. "Casper, I order you to stop right there." The command was pathetic, a child trying to shout down an avalanche with a rulebook. The unfaced didn't falter. It wasn't moving toward us. It was simply moving forward, and we were in the way. It reached the threshold of the room. Garrus made a noise somewhere between a sob and a scream and flattened himself against the opposite wall of the corridor. Alistair stood his ground for a second, a captain refusing to abandon a sinking ship. Then his nerve broke and he stumbled back. I acted, not from courage, but from a deeply ingrained instinct to put a lid on a problem. I lunged for the door, my hand grabbing the heavy steel edge. The unfaced was already in the hallway, its shoulder brushing against mine as it passed. The point of contact was not cold or hot, it was just dense, solid, like brushing against a statue that happened to be warm and wearing a shirt. There was a profound stillness to its flesh that felt fundamentally wrong. It didn't turn, it didn't react. It just continued its silent, purposeful walk down the corridor away from us. "The door!" I said. The three of us threw our weight against it. The heavy metal swung shut, cutting off our view of the placid, walking thing. I slammed my hand against the emergency lock panel and a heavy magnetic bolt slid home. Garrus was leaning against the wall, his eyes screwed shut. Alistair stared at the door we'd just sealed, his face the colour of wet paper. His entire career, his whole life, was built on the idea that things made sense, that there was a form for every contingency. His world had just been invalidated. He turned to me, his eyes searching for an answer I didn't have. "What was that?" he whispered. "I don't know, but it's a biohazard. That's how you classify it. A severe, unidentified biological event." I was giving him a hook, a piece of procedure to cling to. He seized it. He nodded and stumbled to the nearest wall comms panel. "I have to report this, directly to Director Caro." He was calling our ultimate superior, the remote authority in Geneva who oversaw all of Meridian's high-risk operations. As Alistair's call connected, a new dread began to coalesce inside me, colder and sharper than the shock I'd just felt. We had just locked ourselves in a box with a monster, and Alistair was about to hand the only key to a man half a world away. The comms panel chirped, establishing a secure, encrypted link. The screen remained blank. Top-level Meridian calls were audio only, a security feature to prevent visual data from being intercepted. Alistair wasn't just calling the office. He was punching a hole straight to the top of the corporate food chain. "Director Caro," Alistair said, his voice straining to sound composed. "This is Station Commander Kane at Hyperion. We have an event. A severe biological event." I stayed back, leaning against the wall, my arms crossed tight. It felt like standing at the edge of a long drop, something primal yelling to pull him back before he jumped. You don't report a fire by telling the arsonist where you keep the matches. But what could I say? Don't trust the man who signs your paycheck, Alistair. I have a bad feeling. It was useless. Alistair needed a protocol, and Magnus Caro was the man who wrote them. "It's Casper Borg," Alistair continued, his words spilling out in a rush. He's transformed. His face, Director. It's gone. Smooth. Just skin. He paused, listening to the disembodied voice in his earpiece. No, sir. Not wounded. It's perfect. He's mobile. Seems calm. We've locked him in his quarters. I watched Alistair's side of the conversation, and my skin tightened like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. He was listening intently, nodding. Yes, sir. Understood. Contain the subject. No contact. The rest of the crew, yes, there have been auditory hallucinations. The signal, as Beck reported. He glanced at me, his eyes holding a flicker of renewed confidence. He was getting orders. The world was making sense again. Understood, sir. Isolate the affected crew members in their quarters. Full station-wide medical alert. We'll await your instructions on extraction. He fell silent again, listening. The calm on his face began to drain away. He paled. Sir, I don't understand. Protocol 7, that's for a full pandemic-level outbreak. He listened for another long moment, his posture rigid. Yes, sir, he finally said. I understand. Authorizing now. The call ended. The panel went dark. Alistair turned away from it, his features frozen like he'd been carved out of ice. Before I could ask what Protocol 7 was, the station answered for me. A low, resonant tone sounded through the corridors, a sound I had only ever heard during drills. Then the calm, synthesized voice of the station's AI assistant spoke from the overhead speakers. Attention! Emergency Containment Protocol 7 is now active. This is a biohazard contingency. Red lights began to flash, sweeping across the white walls, painting everything in blood-colored strokes. A heavy, grinding sound began to echo through the station's frame. The sound of the massive storm shutters closing over every window, including the great window in the atrium. Another sound followed, a series of heavy, percussive thuds, like giant fists hitting the station from all sides as external hatches were sealed by magnetic locks. This wasn't a quarantine to protect us. This was a lockdown to imprison us. Protocol 7 wasn't designed to keep a threat from getting out. It was designed to ensure nothing and no one could ever get in. Or out. Alistair, what did you do? My orders, he said, not looking at me. Caro's orders. He's taking control. I didn't wait to hear more. I pushed off the wall and ran. My mind was a single, searing point of clarity. The main comms array. My hub. The long-range transmitter. Caro could lock the doors, but he couldn't stop me from screaming for help to every satellite in orbit. I sprinted down the corridor, the red lights flashing in my eyes, the AI's calm voice announcing the sealing of one sector after another. I rounded the corner to the stairwell that led up to my hub. Alistair was there, blocking my path. He had run ahead of me. His face was a mess of conflict, his duty warring with the undeniable terror in his eyes. You can't, Owen, he said, his arms spread slightly. Caro's orders were explicit. Total communication blackout. He's handling this. He's burying us, I said, trying to push past him. This isn't a rescue, it's a cage. He blocked me, grabbing my arms. He was stronger than I expected, his grip fueled by panicked conviction. He's the director. He knows what he's doing. From the speakers above, the AI delivered the final blow. External communications array now offline. Meridian Station Hyperion is now secure. Have a productive day. A deep hum vibrated through the floor as the power to the external dishes was cut. It was over. I stopped fighting Alistair, the strength draining out of me. I turned without another word and walked away, leaving him alone in the blood-red corridor. I felt his eyes on my back, but I didn't look around. I retreated to the one place that was still mine, the comms hub. My sanctuary was now a cage with a panoramic view of its own bars. The main monitors were dead screens, their link to the outside world severed. But the internal network was still alive, a closed circulatory system. I sank into my chair, the leather groaning under my weight. The station schematics glowed on a side monitor, crisscrossed with the red lines of sealed hatches and deactivated systems. Protocol 7. It was an anomaly, a piece of data that didn't fit. You don't amputate a limb to treat a cold. A full, irreversible lockdown for a single, contained biological event. It was disproportionate. It wasn't containment, it was consecration, sealing a holy site, or a sacrificial one. My journalistic instincts, buried for years under layers of technical certifications and cynical detachment, began to stir. I started connecting the data points. An unknown signal appears. Meridian Group shows no interest. A crewman transforms in a way that defies biology. Suddenly, Meridian's top director has a specific, pre-named protocol ready to deploy, one that ensures there are no witnesses and no survivors. He wasn't reacting to a crisis. He was managing a pre-planned experiment. The suspicion solidified into a hard certainty. Caro knew about this signal. He had been waiting for this. We weren't being protected. We were the last ingredient being added to a containment chamber before the lid was sealed shut. If there was a conspiracy, there was a paper trail. A digital one. Caro's orders to Alistair would have been verbal, but the authorization for something as drastic as Protocol 7 would have to be logged somewhere. I dove into the station's primary server logs. It was my system. I knew its secret passages, the maintenance back doors left by technicians who valued access over security. I wrote a simple script, a digital skeleton key, to bypass my own administrative lockdown. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, a language I understood better than I understood the look on Alistair's face. I instructed the system to search for all communications to or from Caro's unique user ID in the last 72 hours. The results were predictable. Alistair's call logs, system status updates. Nothing. Then I modified the search. I told it to look for data packets that were flagged as classified and archived on receipt. Data designed to be read once and then hidden from standard searches. One file appeared. A tiny data packet, less than a kilobyte, sent 12 hours before Alistair made his frantic call. Sent from Caro's office in Geneva to the station's core command system, not to a person. It was an automated directive, waiting for a trigger. It wasn't a message, it was a project brief, a single page of corporate text. Project ID 77 Bravo, Asset Acquisition. Subject, Cosmic Transcriber Event, Hyperion Anomaly. Directive, upon confirmation of successful biological transcription, see attached biomarkers for the unfaced state, enact Containment Protocol 7. Mandate is asset preservation. Current station personnel are considered acceptable biological media. No extraction. Await retrieval team. A dull pressure built behind my eyes. Cosmic transcriber. Acceptable biological media. We weren't crew. We were hosts. We were soil for this thing to grow in. The unfaced wasn't a disease. It was a desired outcome. A product. I scrolled down. Attached was a single image, pulled from some deep archive Meridian probe. It showed a human form that had been cast in a single piece of polished black material like obsidian. Its limbs were not broken or twisted, but fused into the torso, creating a dense, seated monument. The surface absorbed all light except for the head, the same featureless ovoid shape, which had a pearlescent luster. It was a photograph of a finished product. Caro hadn't been surprised. He had a picture of it in a file. He knew exactly what was coming. They were waiting for one of us to ripen so they could harvest the fruit. I copied the file onto a portable datapad. It was proof. It was a weapon. I left the hub, my sanctum, and stepped back into the red pulsing corridors of the station. My mission had changed. It was no longer about survival. It was about rebellion. I found Alistair in the atrium. The massive storm shutter was down over the main window, turning the station's social heart into a sealed chamber. He stood in the middle of the room, speaking into a wall comms panel, trying to reason with the geologists who had barricaded themselves in their lab. I understand you're afraid, he was saying, his voice a strained imitation of command. But we have to maintain order. Director Caro has this situation under control. I walked up behind him and held the datapad in front of the comms panel. Caro is not in control, Alistair. He's the executioner. He turned, startled, his face tight with anger. Beck, I will not have you spreading panic. Read it. I shoved the datapad into his chest. He fumbled it, his eyes flicking from my face to the screen. I watched him read. I saw the sequence of emotions play out like frames of film. First, confusion, as he parsed the corporate jargon. Then, indignant denial, his mouth opening to form a protest. Then, a slow, sickening comprehension. His eyes scanned the text again, faster this time, his mind desperately trying to find a loophole, an alternate interpretation. He got to the attached image of the obsidian figure. The blood drained from his face. The datapad slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the floor. He stared at the spot on the wall where the comms panel was, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing the truth. Acceptable biological media, he whispered. He looked at his own hands, then around the sealed room. He knew. He knew what it would do. When I sealed us in, I was following his orders. You were following the plan, Alistair. We all were. His corporate armor, his lifetime of faith in procedure and the chain of command, shattered. It didn't crack. It disintegrated. He staggered back, a hand pressed to his forehead as if to hold his thoughts together. A low moan escaped his lips. He was adrift in a universe that no longer had rules he understood. He had followed every step in the manual, and it had led him here, to his own execution, an execution he himself had authorized. It was in that moment of absolute psychological collapse that a soft sound broke the stillness, the quiet slide of a door opening down the residential corridor that fed into the atrium. We both turned. Casper Borg stood in the entryway. The door to his room hadn't held him. He stood there, his featureless head surveying the room, not with eyes, but with an unnerving, invasive awareness. Alistair looked from the unfaced to me, his face a canvas of pure, final terror. The monster was real, and the rescue was a lie. There was no one coming. There was nowhere to run. It was too much. The threads holding him together snapped. He backed away from me, away from the thing that was Casper, his hands held up as if to ward off a blow. He started muttering, his gaze turned inward. I followed the rules. I filed the reports. It was procedure. The unfaced took a step into the room, its movement smooth and unhurried. It wasn't looking at me. Its attention was fixed entirely on Alistair, on the chaotic storm of despair radiating from him. The signal had found its next willing listener. Alistair sank to his knees. His eyes were unfocused, looking past us, past the station walls, listening. I should have checked the lines, he mumbled, his voice taking on the cadence of a distant memory. I should have checked them myself. The fault was mine. He wasn't speaking to us. He was confessing. The unfaced glided closer, stopping a meter in front of the kneeling man. It stood over him, a silent, faceless priest receiving a final confession. Alistair didn't seem to notice. He just knelt there, his faith broken, his mind finally open, listening to the judgment only he could hear. I stood frozen, a spectator at a ceremony I couldn't comprehend. My eyes darted between the kneeling figure of my former commander and the datapad lying on the floor. The coolant lines for Sector Gamma, Alistair mumbled, his voice a rhythmic chant of self-flagellation. The report said they were stable. I signed off. I should have checked. The featureless head of Casper Borg didn't move. It was a monolith absorbing Alistair's despair. It was feeding on it. Or maybe it was simply offering him the one thing his structured mind craved more than anything, a final, absolute judgment. The muscles around Alistair's jaw went slack. The lines of worry etched into his forehead began to soften, not relaxing, but dissolving, as if the skin were slowly losing its memory. His lips, still whispering old failures, pressed together. The seam between them thinned, paled, and then vanished into a single unbroken surface. My legs felt like lead, my joints filled with sand. I took one slow step toward the fallen datapad. The unfaced didn't react. Its attention, its entire being, was focused on the act of unmaking the man before it. Alistair's eyelids fluttered, then drooped. They didn't just close, they settled, the lashes seeming to melt away as the lids fused shut, stretching the skin over the curve of his eyeballs. The whole process was methodical, like watching clay being smoothed by an unseen hand. The cartilage of his nose seemed to recede, flattening into the new, blank canvas of his face. Another step. I was halfway to the datapad. My hand was shaking, a tremor that started in my wrist and radiated up my arm. I clenched my fist, trying to will it still. He was becoming a vessel, an empty container being prepared for its contents. He had not been defeated by the monster in front of him. He had been defeated by the one in his own head, the one that whispered of failure and regret. The signal just gave it a voice. I reached the datapad, my shadow stretching long and distorted in the red light. I bent down, my eyes never leaving the two figures. My fingers closed around the smooth plastic. I had it. As I straightened up, my gaze fell upon Alistair for the last time. The transformation was complete. Where the face of a terrified, broken man had been seconds before, there was now only a smooth, featureless ovoid of skin, identical to Casper's. A perfect copy. He was still on his knees. A fresh horror bloomed in my chest as the new, unfaced, the thing that was Alistair, began to slowly get to its feet. It stood beside the first one. They didn't look at each other. They didn't need to. They were no longer individuals. They were nodes in a network. I backed away slowly, clutching the datapad to my chest, one step, then another. I reached the corridor entrance. They both turned their smooth heads in my direction, a synchronized, silent farewell. I didn't run. I turned and walked, my back straight. Back in my sanctuary, the comms hub, the main screens were blank voids, monuments to my powerlessness. Caro had cut the digital throat of the entire station, and I was the chief mourner. Outside this door, two blank-faced things were now part of the station's ecosystem. They weren't hunting me, not yet. They were simply present, like mold spreading in the dark. My eyes fell on the schematics still glowing on the auxiliary monitor. The station's nervous system laid bare. Red lines everywhere showing the closed digital circuits, the software locks Caro had engaged. He was a thorough man. He hadn't just shut the door, he'd bricked it up from the other side. But a system is a physical thing. Caro's commands were just electrons flowing through wires. Wires can be cut. Circuits can be rerouted. His lockdown was a digital wall, and my mind, trained to think in terms of infrastructure, began searching for a physical door, the main comms array. Its power flowed from the station's primary generator, but it passed through a series of physical junctions. I traced the line on the schematic, my finger hovering over the screen. The main conduit ran from the generator core, up through the central column of the station, and then to the roof, where the dishes were. But there was a manual override junction. A heavy, clunky piece of pre-corporate hardware designed for engineers to physically sever power in a catastrophic overload. A failsafe from a time when people still trusted a man with a wrench more than a line of code. It was located in the sub-level maintenance tunnels. The station's gut, a labyrinth of dark, cramped corridors that housed the pipes and conduits that kept us all alive. The ugly truth beneath the clean white composites. It was the one place in the station Caro couldn't lock down with a keyboard. Just as the plan began to form, a small alert blinked to life on a dusty monitor to my left. A proximity warning from the passive long-range sensor suite. It was a listening post, a digital ear pointed at the void. too low priority for Caro to have bothered disabling. It showed a single object moving fast. Its trajectory was a clean, perfect line aimed directly at our coordinates. It was broadcasting no identification signal, no friendly transponder code. It was a ghost ship, running silent, running hard. The retrieval team. Caro wasn't waiting for the experiment to conclude. He was coming to collect his prize and to sanitize the lab. I didn't have days. I probably had hours. I had the proof in my hand. I had a path through the dark. And I had a deadline. I stood up, slid the datapad into the chest pocket of my jacket, and sealed it. Then I walked to the access hatch in the floor of the hub, a place I had never had a reason to open. I turned the manual release wheel. With a groan of protesting metal, the hatch lifted, revealing a steel ladder descending into absolute darkness. The air that rose up smelled of metal and ozone. It was the smell of the station's real machinery, the truth beneath the floor. And I started to climb down. I descended the rungs of the ladder, the metal biting into my palms. This was the station's engine room, its digestive tract. Up above was the clean, curated illusion of safety. Down here was the grime and the groaning reality. My feet hit the grated floor with a clang that echoed down the narrow corridor. I pulled a small diagnostic flashlight from my pocket. Its beam cut a weak cone through the dark, illuminating a tight tunnel walled with massive insulated pipes, slick with condensation. Power conduits snaked along the ceiling, humming low and deep, like a tension wire strung through my skull. This was my world. Not the clean interface of the hub, but the raw hardware. I took my first step, and the station spoke to me. "Good morning, Owen," said the calm, pleasant voice of the Meridian AI from a small speaker grill above my head. My entire body went rigid. Routine maintenance cycle for sub-level sector Gamma 7 is now commencing. For your safety, atmospheric scrubbers and primary lighting will be deactivated. The lights ahead of me, a string of caged yellow bulbs, went out one by one, a wave of darkness rushing toward me. The low hum of the air handlers sighed into silence. Caro. It was Caro watching through the station's eyes, using his placid AI to taunt me. He couldn't see me down here. There were no cameras, but he knew which hatch I'd used. He was shutting down the path ahead of me, trying to box me in. I was left in the unsteady glow of my flashlight. I started moving. My plan was to follow the main power conduit to Junction 4C, where the manual override for the comms array was housed. It was a 15-minute walk in ideal conditions. These were not ideal conditions. I rounded a corner and came to a pressure door, a heavy slab of steel meant to seal off sections in case of a fire or decompression. A red light glowed on its control panel. Locked. Caro, again. He was locking doors ahead of me, trying to herd me into a dead end. I shone my light on the wall next to the door, a maintenance panel, just as the schematic had promised. I pried it open with my fingertips. Inside was a nest of wires and circuit boards. My flashlight clenched between my teeth. I went to work. I stripped the ends of 2 wires with my thumbnail and held them for a second. This would cause a power surge. It would be logged. Caro would know exactly where I was and what I'd done. It was a trade. My position for my progress. I pressed the wires together. A brilliant blue-white flash lit up the corridor, and the magnetic lock on the door released. The red light on the panel died. I pulled my flashlight from my mouth and stepped back from the smoking panel, my eyes adjusting from the glare. I shone the beam through the newly opened doorway into the corridor beyond. And there he was. At the far end of the tunnel, maybe 50 meters away, stood a figure. It was Alistair. His new blank face was a pale oval in the darkness, turned directly toward me. He wasn't running. He wasn't threatening. He was just standing there, waiting, perfectly positioned to block the direct route to Junction 4C. He hadn't followed me. He had anticipated me. They didn't need to see. They were connected to the station's nervous system. They could feel the flow of power, the opening and closing of circuits. They could feel me moving through their web. I backed away from the doorway. I couldn't go forward. I looked to my left, down a smaller auxiliary tunnel, a coolant line access route. It was longer, more cramped, but it would eventually intersect with the main conduit again, well past Alistair's position. It was my only move. I took it, plunging into the tighter darkness. The coolant tunnel was a cage of ribs. Thinner pipes, branched and complex, lined the walls, some shedding a fine powder of frost that glittered in my flashlight beam. I had to turn sideways to squeeze through some sections, my shoulder scraping against the insulated metal. This was a place for machines and maintenance drones, not a running man. I paused, leaning against a large valve, and pulled out the datapad. The station schematic glowed on its screen, a tiny island of order in the oppressive dark. I was a rat in a wall, but I was a rat with a map. My new route was a long, ugly dogleg, but it would work. It had to. I flicked the screen off and listened. Nothing. Just the whisper of the pipes. I started moving again, faster this time, my feet sure on the grated floor. Then I heard a sound that didn't belong. It started as a whisper inside my own head, woven into the sound of my own panting. So quiet at first I thought I was imagining it. "Owen, stop running." I flinched, stumbling against a pipe. The voice was clean this time. It was Leo. It was inside my skull. "Get out," I hissed into the darkness. "You're so tired," the voice said, full of a gentle, heartbreaking pity. "You've been fighting for so long, fighting my memory, fighting yourself. Now you're fighting shadows in the dark. You don't have to anymore." I pressed the heels of my hands against my temples, as if I could physically squeeze the voice out. "You're not real," I gasped. "I am," the voice insisted, warm and reasonable. "I am the answer you've been searching for. You thought the truth was mundane. I thought it was a conspiracy. We were both wrong. The truth isn't one or the other. It's both. The signal is real, Owen. The mystery is real. And Caro is real too. This is the secret at the heart of the world. Don't you want to finally understand? It was the ultimate temptation. It wasn't offering an escape. It was offering a unified field theory for my shattered reality. It was offering to make sense of the horror. It was offering me the one thing I had craved my entire life. The right answer. My brother's ghost was telling me I could be right, and he could be right, and it could all be over. My knees felt weak. The tunnel ahead seemed to stretch into an infinite, exhausting darkness. Maybe I could just stop, just for a second, just to listen. No, the word was a silent detonation in my own mind. Leo had died because he listened. Alistair was gone because he listened. Listening was surrender. You took my brother. You wore his voice like a coat, but you're not him. He was a fool, but he was my fool, and you are just a signal. I pushed myself off the wall. Silence. It was gone. I was alone again, panting in the dark, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. I raised the flashlight. The beam was steady now, and up ahead, at the end of the long tunnel, I saw a rectangular outline of light. A hatch, junction 4C. The light from the hatch pulled me forward. It was a promise of an endpoint, a sign that this cramped, dark purgatory had a finale. I scrambled the last few meters, my boots loud on the grate, and pushed through the access hatch into the junction room. It was a small, hexagonal chamber, a node where the station's thickest arteries converged. Conduits the size of pythons coiled across the walls, all leading to a single, massive distribution panel. On that panel was what I had come for, a heavy black lever encased in a yellow and black striped box. A relic of pure analog control, the manual override. And they were waiting for me. Both of them. Casper and Alistair stood on opposite sides of the panel, silent and still. They weren't just guarding it. They were integrated with it. Casper had one hand pressed flat against the main power conduit, the one I needed to divert. Alistair stood directly in front of the override switch, his body a placid human shield. Their blank faces were turned toward me, pale ovals in the harsh utility lighting of the chamber. My forward momentum died. I was a rat who had found the cheese only to see the trap was already occupied. They weren't going to move. They weren't going to fight. They were just going to stand there, immovable, forcing me to either give up or commit to something new. My eyes darted around the chamber, my mind stripping away the surface and seeing only the system beneath. I couldn't push them. I couldn't reason with them. But they were touching the machine. They were part of the circuit, and a circuit can be overloaded. To the left of the main panel was a smaller coolant intake valve, a thick, frost-covered pipe connected to a pressure-release nozzle. It was a safety feature, designed to vent supercooled nitrogen gas directly onto the conduits to prevent a meltdown. A dangerous, last-ditch failsafe. I had no tool to open the valve manually, but the control mechanism was electronic. I moved toward it, my flashlight beam steady. They watched me, their heads tracking my movement in perfect, silent unison. They made no move to intercept. They were confident in their position. I ripped the cover off the valve's control box. Inside was a simple logic board. I didn't need to hotwire it. I just needed to break it. I drove the metal butt of my flashlight into the circuit board. A shower of green sparks erupted, and the smell of fried electronics filled the small room. With a scream of protesting metal, the valve blew open. A jet of pure white gas, thick as smoke and colder than the Antarctic night, blasted into the chamber. It wasn't aimed at them, it was aimed at the power conduit Casper was touching. The supercooled gas hit the warm metal, and the air erupted in a violent hiss. The pipe groaned, contracting from the thermal shock. Frost spiderwebbed across its surface in an instant. Casper reacted. He snatched his hand back from the pipe with the reflexive self-preservation of a machine protecting itself from damage. His entire body recoiled from the sudden, extreme cold. The move created a gap, a path to the panel. It was all the opening I needed. I lunged forward, diving through the billowing white cloud of nitrogen. The cold was a physical blow, a pain so sharp it felt like fire, stealing the breath from my lungs. My skin screamed, but I pushed through it. I crashed against the main panel, my shoulder hitting the metal hard. Alistair stood before me, his blank face inches from mine. I didn't try to move him. I reached around him and clawed at the housing for the override switch. My numb fingers found the release catch. I flipped it open. Alistair's hand shot out, clamping down on my wrist. His grip was inhuman. Not the desperate strength of a man, but the calm, crushing pressure of a hydraulic press. My bones groaned. Pain flared up my arm, sharp and absolute. I couldn't pull free. His other hand started to move toward my face. With my free hand, I grabbed the end of a loose diagnostic cable hanging from the panel and jammed it against the exposed circuitry where I had smashed my flashlight. I shoved the frayed copper wires into the live contacts. The world went white. Electricity arced from the panel, through my body and into the unfaced holding me. It wasn't a shock. It was a physical concussion of energy. The air cracked with the sound. My hair stood on end. Alistair's body went rigid, convulsing. His grip on my wrist slackened. I ripped my arm free and grabbed the heavy black lever with both hands and threw my entire body weight downward. The lever moved with a deep, grinding chunk that vibrated through the entire chamber. It locked into its new position. A klaxon began to blare, loud and frantic. The main lights in the junction died, plunging us into the flashing emergency strobes. Above the klaxon, the station's AI voice spoke, its tone no longer calm, but a clipped, mechanical shriek. Warning! Catastrophic power surge detected. Main generator offline. Station life support compromised. The lights in my hub flickered on, powered by a separate backup battery. The main comms console sparked to life. Its screen glowed with the Meridian Group logo, followed by a system reboot sequence. I had done it. I had given myself a voice again, but I had just killed the station to do it. I burst back into the comms hub. The main console was alive, its screen a beautiful, brilliant blue, running through its boot-up sequence. The klaxon was muted up here, but the flashing red lights still painted the walls in silent sweeps. I staggered to my chair and fell into it. My arm, where Alistair had grabbed me, was a mess of raw red burns, the skin blackened where his fingers had been. On the long-range sensor monitor, the ghost ship was closer, much closer. The retrieval team. I had minutes, not hours. The console finished booting, system ready. I slammed the datapad onto the console's reader port. The file upload window appeared. I initiated a full-spectrum broadcast, a digital scream aimed at every satellite in the sky, every open network, every listening post that could possibly hear it. I aimed my truth at the entire world like a shotgun blast. A thin green progress bar appeared at the bottom of the screen and began its slow, painful crawl across the dark display. Then, a new sound cut through the alarm. A heavy, rhythmic thump. It was coming from the hatch I'd just sealed. They were coming for me, both of them. The bar pushed past the first quarter mark just as the thumping grew louder, more frantic. A new icon blinked on my screen. An incoming priority message from Caro's unique ID. His last, desperate attempt to regain control. I swiped it away without reading. The time for his words was over. The progress bar crept past the halfway point, a point of no return. The metal of the hatch groaned, denting inward with a loud, percussive boom. The bar was now in its final quarter, a desperate sprint to the finish. With a final, terrible shriek of tearing metal, the hatch flew from its frame and clattered across the floor. They rose into the room together. The twitching had stopped. Their movements were fluid again. They stood there, two blank-faced sentinels, their heads turned toward me. They started to walk. Not fast. They didn't need to be. The room was small. There was nowhere left for me to run. My eyes were locked on the last sliver of the bar waiting to be filled. I leaned back in my chair, watching it. Let them come. I had won. My story, my proof, my brother's insane truth was escaping this tomb. I thought of Leo out in the desert, chasing a whisper. He died for a mystery. I was about to die for a fact. The first one, Casper, reached my chair. A cold hand settled on my shoulder. The last fraction of the bar filled, turning a solid, brilliant green. The transmission was complete. A profound, bone-deep sense of peace settled over me. I turned my head slowly and looked up into the smooth, featureless face that bent down toward mine. A sound filled the room. It didn't come from a mouth. It was a vibration that resonated from the blank flesh. A psychoacoustic projection that was perfect, and intimate, and utterly final. It was the voice of Magnus Caro speaking from the skin of his monster. "Asset acquired," it said. And then a new voice joined it, a chorus singing inside my own head. My brother's voice, full of wonder and finality. "Welcome home, Owen." I felt a gentle pressure on my face, like a warm hand smoothing away the lines of a lifetime of worry. The flashing red lights of the station began to soften, to blur, and then, finally, to fade into a perfect, quiet dark. 6 months after the fall of Meridian Station Hyperion, Camille Sharma lived in a world made of whispers. Her small apartment, once a neat and logical space, had become a nest. Blackout curtains covered the windows. The only light came from the glow of 3 monitors, their screens a constant river of data streams and audio spectrograms. Before she had looked for patterns. Now she was terrified of finding one. She had been a junior analyst at the Arecibo Consortium, a polite academic term for a group of universities that listened for aliens. She spent her nights sifting through cosmic noise, a digital beachcomber searching for a single, structured shell. When Owen Beck's data burst hit their servers, it wasn't a shell. It was a tidal wave. It bypassed their firewalls and flooded their systems with a single massive file, his last will and testament. Camille had been the first to open it. She saw the corporate letterhead, the project name, Cosmic Transcriber. She saw the clinical, horrifying phrase, acceptable biological media. She saw the photograph of the obsidian monument that had once been a person. And she listened. She heard the strained voice of a commander named Alistair, the quiet hum of a station turning into a tomb, and finally the raw shouting of Owen Beck as he fought an enemy inside his own head. She had done what any sane, rational person would do. She reported it. Her superiors listened patiently, then quietly confiscated her logs. The consortium issued a statement about a highly sophisticated malicious data packet. When she pushed, her contract was terminated due to emotional instability. Meridian Group's official story hit the news a week later, a tragic accident, a catastrophic power failure, the regrettable outcome of extreme environmental psychosis. A mundane truth, tidy and sealed. Owen Beck had sacrificed everything to get the truth out. He had fought his own cynicism, the very core of his being, to make one final desperate act of faith. And his reward was to become a ghost. His data burst. His proof was now a legend in the dark corners of the internet. The Hyperion file. It was traded on encrypted servers between conspiracy theorists and fringe believers, the very people Owen had spent his life despising. His final logical testament had become the founding scripture for a new, irrational church. He had not slain the dragon. He had given it a name and a legion of new worshippers. The world had not changed. Meridian was still a titan. Director Magnus Caro was a name that never surfaced. But Camille had changed. The work had hollowed her out, leaving behind a quiet, gnawing paranoia. She had seen the code behind the curtain. She understood now that some truths are too large to be believed, and that a lack of evidence is not the same as absence. Her monitor pinged, an automated alert she had written herself, an anomaly, a whisper of structure buried deep in the background radiation from the Oort cloud. It was probably nothing. A passing satellite, a solar flare. It was the same kind of signal Leo Beck had once died for, the same kind his brother had tried to debunk. Camille leaned forward, her face bathed in the screen's glow. She did not try to debunk it. She did not try to rationalize it. She simply isolated the signal, opened a new encrypted file and began to listen. She didn't know what the Cosmic Transcriber was, or what Meridian planned to do with its new asset. She only knew that the signal was real. The silence was full of monsters, and Owen Beck's final, terrible gift to the world was not a warning. It was a curse, and now she was one of the cursed, one of the ones who listened,